Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we have a really fascinating and actually unpublished manuscript on our desks.
Yeah, it's a really unique one.
It really is. It's titled 13 Elephants, Third Space by Dr. Micheal Brown. And, our mission for you today is to basically extract this radical, empowering strategy for navigating your deepest traumas and life transitions right from his work.
Right, because we're looking at what it actually takes to redefine what's normal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To find genuine power in having an unfiltered, messy history. So, okay, let's unpack this. To really grasp what Dr. Brown is proposing, I want you to imagine that weird feeling when you're, moving out of a house.
Oh, yeah, the very specific limbo.
Right. All the furniture is gone, but you haven't handed the keys over yet. You are just standing in this empty, echoing room. You don't live there anymore, but you haven't arrived at your new place yet either.
It is a profound sense of cognitive limbo. You are entirely in between. And I mean, society usually conditions us to panic in that empty room.
Oh, for sure.
We are told to rush out, get to the new house, buy new furniture, and just immediately project this image that we have moved on.
To fix it as fast as possible.
But
Dr. Brown's core concept, this thing he calls the third space, it suggests the complete opposite. What if the secret to surviving the hardest parts of your life is, pulling up a chair and just sitting in that empty room on purpose?
Yeah.
It's a mental waiting room between who you used to be and who you are becoming. A place where you don't erase your painful past, but you actively reframe it.
The crucial distinction here, though, is that the third space is not like a physical retreat you go to.
Right. It's not a cabin in the woods.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is an internal, highly reflective psychological state. So when you experience a massive transition, like a trauma, a divorce, a major failure, there is the event itself, right?
Yeah.
That is the first space.
The actual thing that happens.
Yes. Then there is your immediate reactive emotion.
Yeah.
The fear, the anger, maybe the numbness. That is the second space.
Okay, so where does the third space come in?
The third space is what happens next, provided you choose to enter it. It's this deliberate pause where we look directly at the debris of our lives and extract wisdom from it without judgment.
But I think to understand why this theory carries any weight at all, we really have to look at the man who wrote it, because Dr. Brown's background is incredibly unconventional for an academic writing about well-being.
To put it mildly.
Yeah, to put it mildly. He grounds his entire methodology in his own, profound brokenness. Let me just paint a picture from the text. When he was just 7 years old, playing rugby league in New Zealand, he was given an award at the end of the year.
But not for being the best player.
No, definitely not the MVP. The award was literally called the hardest trier, and it was handed to him by Precious McKenzie, who is a famous Olympic weightlifter, but he stood just 4'9" tall.
Right, so you have this giant of the sporting world packed into a small frame, handing a young boy a trophy that essentially says, you're nowhere near the best, but, well, you survived the effort.
Yeah.
It just perfectly sets the tone for his entire narrative arc.
It really does, because from there, the struggle just amplifies. I mean,
Right.
He fails every single high school subject except for art.
Wow.
He survives childhood abandonment when his parents divorce. He's 13 at the time. And then as an adult, he goes through 3 divorces of his own.
That's a lot.
It is. He builds this highly successful business only to face total bankruptcy. He even details spending time institutionalized in the Tukanui Mental Health Hospital, literally sitting in a yard watching a woman who had decapitated her husband pacing in circles.
Yeah, that's a very heavy, very real environment.
So wait, let me stop right there. Because if I am the listener, I'm asking, how does a guy whose life includes bankruptcy, 3 divorces, and being institutionalized write a guide on healing?
Right.
How does that chaotic resume make him an authority on well-being?
Well, this raises an important question about how we even define authority. In Dr. Brown's philosophy, authority comes from brokenness, not the absence of it.
Okay.
He explicitly claims the title, I am the expert of me. If we think about how resilience is typically marketed to us...
Oh, it's always so shiny.
Exactly. It's portrayed as having this flawless record. It's the executive who loses a job and seamlessly lands a better one 2 weeks later without a scratch.
I bounce back better than ever.
Right. And Dr. Brown argues that is just an illusion. True resilience is the ability to survive catastrophic failure, sit in the smoldering debris, and reflect on it without letting it destroy your core identity. He has lived the pain he is theorizing about.
He actually says at one point, I am the hardest trier. I win when I lose when I win.
That's such a powerful line.
It is. Let's dig into that because he talks extensively about sabotage. During his business success, he owned this very profitable garden center, but he felt so fake in his wealth that at 2 a.m. he would be holding a ficus plant and a Bacardi, catching taxis around the city just to give plants away to strangers.
That is just, it's such a striking image.
It's wild. He eventually held a literal 90% off sale, deliberately dismantling his own business. The liquidators came and pulled the carpets right out of his house.
And, the mechanism behind that sabotage is fascinating. Why hold a 90% off sale at 2:00 a.m.?
Right. It seems crazy from the outside.
Exactly. But it is not just a random breakdown. When our external world, the wealth, the success, the pristine image, does not match our internal reality of feeling broken or traumatized, the brain experiences massive cognitive dissonance.
You just can't handle the gap between the two.
Precisely. Dr. Brown subconsciously destroyed his false success because he was desperately trying to force his external reality back into alignment with an internal truth that actually felt authentic to him.
Yeah.
He was tearing down the facade.
It makes me think about how we treat trauma in our daily lives.
Yeah.
Think about the last time you, the listener, went through a bad breakup or a sudden job loss. How many people told you, like, oh, you'll bounce back or just stay positive within the first 24 hours?
Way too many, I'm sure.
It feels like there is this invisible societal algorithm that just constantly monitors us. If you get divorced or fail a class, the algorithm flags you as defective. It forces you to pretend everything is fine and assimilate back into what is considered normal as quickly as possible.
And Dr. Brown actually has a specific term for that algorithm. He calls it the machine.
The machine.
Yeah. The machine represents societal constructs, mass media, institutional bureaucracy, and just the relentless pressure to conform. The machine requires order to function.
It hates mess.
It disguises mess. It needs a dominant, sanitized narrative to maintain control over everyone's behavior. So when you experience trauma, your pain is inefficient.
So the machine enforces toxic positivity.
Exactly. It tells you to throw away the broken pieces, buy a new plate, and just get back to work.
And the opposite of the machine, in his framework, is the other.
Yes. The other represents the authentic individual. It is the outsider who refuses to or simply lacks the capacity to fit into the machine's neat little boxes.
Which is where the third space comes back in.
Right. Entering the third space, choosing to sit with your messy, bankrupt, divorced reality rather than hiding it, is a profound act of rebellion. It is a conscious choice to inhabit the identity of the other. Dr. Brown summarizes this feeling with this brilliant realization. He says, I am not strange, I am just not normal.
I am not strange, I am just not normal. That completely strips the shame away, doesn't it?
It really does.
But if resisting the machine means refusing to hide our pain, we have to look directly at the exact things society tells us to sweep under the rug. Which brings us to the actual imagery of his work.
The title itself.
Yeah. In Dr. Brown's framework, he visualizes those hidden traumas as giant, unavoidable elephants, specifically 13 elephants.
So let's break down the symbolism of that title, maybe starting with the number 13.
Yeah, here's where it gets really interesting to me because 13 is universally known as an unlucky number.
Superstition, bad luck, yeah.
And the elephant in the room is an awkward idiom about a massive problem everyone is aggressively ignoring. So why would you anchor a philosophy of healing to symbols of bad luck and social discomfort?
Well, it is a deliberate disruption of our conditioning. The third space intentionally takes what we are told to fear, represented by the superstition of the number 13, and what we are told to ignore, the elephant, and forcefully drags them into the light.
And his personal connection to the number 13 borders on obsessive, honestly. His parents divorced when he was 13. His first marriage lasted 13 years.
Wow.
When he was a kid, he had a habit of compulsively counting the letters and numbers on passing car license plates until they added up to exactly 13.
That's a really intense coping mechanism.
He has the number tattooed on his wrist now. He sews it into his clothing labels. He even hid a tiny number 13 as a footnote on the 13th word of the 13th page of his PhD thesis.
That's brilliant, actually. He took an obsession born of trauma and reframed it into a source of power. The 13 represents the unknown, the superstition, the arbitrary things society tells us to fear for no rational reason.
Right.
By branding himself with it, he neutralizes the fear.
Mm-hmm.
And then you pair that with the elephant. Yes, it represents the massive, glaring, unaddressed truths in our lives, like abuse, failure, deep loneliness. But biologically and mythologically, the elephant is also a creature known for immense loyalty, grace, and just an unbreakable memory.
He actually tried to buy a real elephant once.
Wait, really?
Yes. The text details how he surveyed his land, checked the local city council requirements, and seriously investigated purchasing an elephant named Jumbo that he used to feed as a kid at a local park.
That is incredible.
He wanted the elephant standing right there in his front yard, out in the open. He wanted it so glaringly obvious, so he wouldn't even have the option to hide his truth anymore.
The metaphor there is incredibly potent. The elephant sitting in the room isn't there to destroy the room. It is waiting for you to acknowledge its presence without fear.
Yeah.
The machine's only advice is to pretend the elephant doesn't exist, which takes an exhausting amount of psychological energy.
Constantly tiptoeing around it.
Right. But the third space asks you to look the elephant in the eye, recognize its loyalty to your personal history, and speak its name out loud.
But hold on, let me challenge that for a second. If I just sit in an empty room, staring at all my past failures, looking my elephants in the eye, isn't that just wallowing?
That's a common concern, yeah.
Like, how is entering the third space any different from just slipping into a deep depression and ruminating on how terrible my life is?
That is the vital boundary we need to draw here. Rumination is a passive trap. It is letting the memory of the trauma wash over you repeatedly while feeling totally helpless.
Okay.
The third space is an active, constructive state. You aren't just looking at the trauma, you are engaging in narrative healing. This is where Dr. Brown brings in the concept of kintsugi.
Kintsugi. That's the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery, right?
Yes, exactly.
Instead of using clear glue to hide the cracks and make the bowl look like it was never dropped, the artisan uses a lacquer mixed with liquid gold or silver. You aggressively highlight the brokenness.
Beautifully said. Let's look at the psychological mechanism behind that metaphor. When you keep a trauma hidden, it lives in the amygdala, which is the brain's fear center. It operates as a raw, unprocessed threat.
Just buzzing in the background.
Exactly. But when you enter the third space and actively write down your trauma or speak it aloud to a trusted person, you are forcing the prefrontal cortex to process that emotional memory.
Oh, wow.
You aren't just remembering it, you are literally restructuring how the brain stores that information. That cognitive restructuring, taking control of the narrative, is the liquid gold of kintsugi.
It makes me think of open source software.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, with closed proprietary software, which is basically the company tries to hide all the bugs and pretend the code is flawless.
Right. Yeah.
But with open source software, the bugs and the patches are completely public. You don't try to hide the code's flaws, you document them. And that public documentation, that transparency about what broke and how it was patched, is exactly what makes the software robust and trustworthy going forward.
That analogy perfectly captures the shift. Third space storytelling does not demand that you say the trauma was a good thing. It shifts the narrative from, I am permanently corrupted by this bug, to, this broke me, but the way I patched the code is where my actual value lies.
Let's put this in the real world, though. On a random Tuesday afternoon, what does narrative healing actually look like? Dr. Brown gives a really raw example of this with his divorces, doesn't he?
He does.
By his third divorce, he thought he knew how to do it right. He thought he had learned from watching his own parents' amicable split, but he failed again. He was devastated. He felt like a complete failure of a man and a failure of a father.
And if he followed the machine, he would have just jumped onto a dating app, hit the gym, and pretended he was thriving.
Totally.
Instead, he sat in the third space. Through intense dialogue and self-reflection, he integrated the failure. The narrative shifted from, I am defined by my inability to sustain a marriage, to, each ending forced me to confront my own behaviors, taught me more about my boundaries, and clarified how I choose to be loved.
He reclaimed his authorship.
Exactly. The machine wants to tell your story for you. It wants to categorize you as just a divorce statistic. The third space gives you the pen to write your own truth.
He does this with his professional life, too. He talks about his time working in the social services sector with abused women and children.
Right, that was a huge turning point.
He would sit in these rooms listening to perpetrators of violence speak freely, while he, the professional, felt forced to wear this sterile corporate mask. He realized that the professional machine of social work often protected bureaucratic liability over actual human truth.
The paperwork over the people.
Yes. So he chose to take his mask off. He chose to be the hardest trier in the room, bringing his own flaws, his own history of institutionalization, right into his work.
And by doing so, he translates individual pain into communal wisdom. When you put yourself back together with the gold of your own authentic narrative, when you leave your open source patches visible, you give everyone around you the subconscious permission to do the same.
It's contagious.
It really is. You stop viewing your non-normalcy as a liability, and you start utilizing it as an asset.
We have covered incredible ground today. We started with Dr. Brown's raw history, the 7-year-old hardest trier who failed at school, faced bankruptcy, and destroyed his own garden center just to feel authentic.
A lot of elephants in that history.
So many elephants. We explored the invisible societal algorithm of the machine that demands we hide our flaws, and the quiet, powerful rebellion of choosing to be the other.
We learned that we have to actively invite the 13 elephants into the room to neutralize our fear of them.
And finally, we saw how the cognitive restructuring of kintsugi, documenting our bugs like open source software, turns our deepest wounds into our greatest strengths.
So for you listening right now, I challenge you to consider your own elephants. What are the unaddressed truths, the perceived failures, the messy patches you have been exhausted trying to hide from the machine? The core insight of the third space is that your ultimate value does not lie in an unbroken, sanitized record.
Right.
Your value lies in the authenticity of your survival. You hold the pen.
It really fundamentally alters how you view every setback you've ever had. Which leaves us with this final thought. If the machine derives all of its cultural power from making us feel isolated and ashamed of our broken pieces, what happens to the entire structure of our society if millions of people suddenly decide their brokenness is actually their gold?